Good morning. How are y'all doing this morning? Y'all bright-eyed and ready to be in church this morning? Thankful to be here? God's good, isn't he? As you can tell, Brother Tony is still recovering, but doing well. And we're still trying to help him out a little bit this morning. Get all my little stuff together. Brother Mark's done got a pro at this, and us little amateurs, we still haven't learned how to do all this stuff. And so, our lesson this morning is reopening the wells. Jesus Christ is the fountain from which all spiritual blessings flow. To receive this life-giving source, our lives must be kept clean and clear of carnal clutter. And our golden text this morning is, "He that believeth on me, as the scripture hath said, out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water." John 7:38. Our scripture reading this morning is in Genesis chapter 26 and verses 18 through 33. And let's back up and start. Well, let's start at 18. It says, "And Isaac digged again the wells of water which they had digged in the days of Abraham his father, for the Philistines had stopped them after the death of Abraham, and he called their names after the names by which his father had called them. And Isaac's servants digged in the valley and found there a well of springing water, and the herdmen of Gerar did strive with Isaac's herdmen, saying, The water is ours. And he called the name of the well Ezek, because they strove with him. And they digged another well and strove for the well for that also, and he called the name of it Sitnah. And he removed from thence and digged another well, and for that they strove not, and he called the name of it Rehoboth. And he said, For now the Lord had made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land. And he went up from hence to Bathsheba, and the Lord appeared unto him that same night, and said, I am the God of Abraham thy father. Fear not, for I am with thee, and will bless thee, and multiply thy seed for thy servant Abraham's sakes. And he builded an altar there, and called upon the name of the Lord, and he pitched his tents there, and there Isaac's servants digged a well. Then Amalek went to him from Gerar, and Hushah from his friend, one of his friends, and Philichol, the chief captain of his army. And Isaac said unto them, Wherefore come ye to me, seeing you hate me, and have sent me away from you? And they said, We saw certainly that the Lord was with thee. And we said, Let there be now an oath betwixt us, even between us and thee, and let us make a covenant with thee, that thou wilt do us no harm, as we have not touched thee, and we have done unto thee nothing but good. And they have sent them away in peace, and thou art now the blessed of the Lord. And he made them a feast, and they did eat and drink. And they rose up betimes in the morning, and sware one to another. And Isaac sent them away, and they parted from him in peace. And it came to pass that the same day that Isaac's servants came and told him concerning the well which they have digged, and they said unto him, We have found water. And he called it Sheba. Therefore the name of the city is Beersheba unto this day. Now, I looked and I researched, and I tried to find out, and you can find a little bit about how many Israelites was with Moses when he came out of Egypt. They was somewhere, between 2 and 4 million people. So you can kind of get that. And I tried to find out how many people was with Isaac, to get an idea of how many people was traveling with him. And they talked about that they'd run him out of Gerar because his army was getting big, or not his army, but his people following him, and his people with him, and his herdsmen was getting large, and they sent him away, Brother Mark. And you read back and you look back, and I'm trying to set you a little foundation this morning. You go back and you look at when Lot left Abraham, it talks about he went to the well-watered plains, but Abraham had to go dig wells. And, there's one thing that you can't survive off of, and that's water. You can last about 3 days. So they was out in this area where there wasn't water. There wasn't streams flowing through. There wasn't no source of water. So they was digging wells. And I was wondering, they didn't have these big $1 million drill rigs that they back up, raise the boom, put the bit down, and just go to digging. They didn't even have an excavator to sit there and dig. The bored wells nowadays, they come in with like a clamshell about 24 inches diameter. They just sit there and bore, pick it up, and set it over. They didn't have that. They had a shovel and a pickaxe. And they went to digging wells. Now, I don't know how big of a well they dug. I don't know how big around the well they dug. But most everybody in this class has seen a hand-dug well. I mean, I didn't have one at my house, but we had one at the church. At the church I was raised at Trinity. The actual well is still out by the road if you ever get over there. It's still sitting there. They got a cover over the top of it, but it was a hand-dug well. It stands about this tall off the ground. It's got blocks and mortar around it. And I envisioned that this was probably something like they had. It was a well that was protected, had something around it, but I don't know how big it was, Brother Wayne. And I got to thinking about, and I tried to figure out, and I run some numbers, and I'm a numbers guy, I'm sorry. I run some numbers. And I figured if there was 2 million people that went out of Egypt headed to Canaan with Moses, or 3 or 4, how many you had. If you backed up and you dropped it down a little bit, and you dropped it down to 100,000 people with Isaac. I don't know, Brother Mark, there may not have been that many. But for a number's sake, I want to show you something this morning. For a number's sake, 100,000 people, you need a gallon of water per person to really survive every day. And if you had a cow for every 4 people, a husband, his wife, and 2 kids, if you had a cow for every one of them, that's 25,000 cows you got to water. A cow drank 20 gallons of water a day. So you look at it and you say, well, that's a lot of water. That's 600,000 gallons of water that you need to be dipping out of that well to feed them cows and them people. If you had 100,000 people, now y'all bear with me. I'm headed somewhere. It wasn't one of them things, Brother Dimble, that you just went out and you said, well, I'm gonna just dip out a little bit today, and that's all I need. It was something that was necessity. They had to dig a well. They had to have a well that had water in it, and they had to survive off of this well. It wasn't just a happenstance thing. It wasn't something that was just a little bitty thing. It was something that was going to sustain them. But even once they got the well dug, it still took an effort to water and to feed. Water all these people. All of us know what a 5-gallon bucket looks like. It holds 5 gallons of water. You take these water needs, and if you dipping it with a 5-gallon bucket on 100,000 people and them cows, you need to dip 3 buckets every 2 seconds. That's 1,000, 2 1,000. That's 3 buckets of water. That's 15 gallons. So what I'm trying to say is, what I'm trying to establish, my numbers may be wrong, but what I'm trying to establish to you is there was a need for water. There was a need for well. It wasn't just something that you just happenstance and you just come along and you just thought, well, I think I'll just dig a well. But the only way they could survive was with a well. Church, the only way today that we're going to survive is to have a well from heaven that's supplying our needs, that's supplying our spiritual need, that's keeping us going. If you haven't ever experienced the well of salvation, I encourage you today, don't put it off another day. And I know that this is going out in the air, but as I look around this congregation today, and every one of them in here has experienced the well of salvation. So it's not necessarily going to you, and that's in this particular portion of the Sunday school lesson, but if it's going to you out in Radio Land or wherever else this morning, YouTube land, if you've never experienced it, I encourage you to experience it. Now, where did they start digging the well? Every time he dug a well, he found water. Now, how did he know where to dig? Yeah, his father Abraham had dug in that land, so he kind of knew. But the Philistines had come along and they'd covered up the wells. and you probably grassed over, and he didn't have GPS. He didn't have a location to know where he dug, but he probably went through the same process that Abraham went through. Church, when you go and you're looking for a place and you wonder where to dig a well, this is the best source. It'll tell you where the water is. It'll tell you how to dig it. It'll tell you where to dig it. You know, I remember as a kid when I was about 7 years old, my daddy and my granddaddy was going to dig a well at the house. And we was going to do it for irrigation. And we was going to put my other grandmother on my mother's side, was going to use it for her house. And we went out there, and Daddy got a chinaberry tree. And I went out and looked this morning. I got here early. I was going to find me a chinaberry tree. Every tree won't work. It has to be a chinaberry tree. And you have to come down and you get a fork, and you turn it in your hands, and you stick it up, and you hold it. And you walk with it. And it'll actually turn the bark on that tree as it turns down to tell you what to dig. In the natural, everybody can't do that. And every tree won't work. But if you get the right person that it works in their hands, and you get the right bush, you can do it. That well was dug 30-something feet, washed with a water hose and a bit, and it went down, and today he's still irrigating out of it. It's still there. But Brother Mark, what happened to that well was the well had sand. When you picked it up, the water tasted great, but it had sand in it. You could collect it in the bottom of your hand. Every glass of water you poured in it, you had sand in the bottom. Every glass of tea you drank, you had sand in the bottom. Every time you washed clothes, you had sand in it. It was beach white sand. What happens, church, when you're digging in the wrong place, when you're using the wrong thing and you don't get it deep enough? Sometimes you may get water, but you may have to filter it out. You may have impurities in there. You may be in the wrong place. It may have the wrong thing in it. Today you look and we go across this country, and even in South Georgia, we sit on the biggest aquifer in the southeast or in the country, the Floridian aquifer. There's plenty of water. You dig down, but you get some places, like here in Colquitt County, that there's a fault. You hit it, and the water just isn't there. You get other places that's close to the ground, and you can get it. You get other places, Brother Dimble, when you get down, if you hit the wrong spot, you'll go through sulfur. And it'll taste like sulfur for the rest of as long as you pumping out of it. What I'm trying to tell you, church, if you don't live up to the word, and you don't abide by the word, and you don't use the word as what you're digging by, and you don't stay with it and get to where you need to be, then sometimes your well just won't, it'll always stink. It'll always be wrong because you didn't follow the correct path in digging the well. But if you'll follow God's path and you'll really get on his well, and you'll really get down to the salvation, and you'll really get down and get a well, it'll stay. It'll stay. We're spoiled in this country. We are. We have solar wells. We have windmill wells. We still have a few dug wells. We have probably, there's very few people that knows how to take a bucket and reach down and flip it and make it and pull it up and dip it out. It ain't just a little plastic bucket. You got to get a bucket that's just right to flip it down and come up with it. It's work. We're used to going out there and have the electricity and somebody else paying for the electricity. Somebody else is supplying the electricity. Somebody else is making it. We flip the switch and it comes on. We walk to our spouts at the house. There's a pressurized tank. You turn it on and the water flows out. You don't think nothing about it until the water runs out. You don't think nothing about it until the electricity goes south. What about us today in our church services? We didn't think nothing about gathering to church on Sunday morning. If we wanted to go on vacation, we did. If we wanted to lay at the house, we did. Church doors always be open. But in March of 2020, what happened? Corona came by. All of a sudden, the doors was closed. All of a sudden, we were scared to come to church. What happened? You started realizing exactly what the church house meant to you, what that well and coming and drinking is. I often think about when I pass this little section down here, today Sister Daughtry is already, she's the only person that I ever knew that was part of the original church. And you know, I go back and I listen to history, and we're right at 98, 99 years old from our establishment. Brother Denville, there was a little community down over here in the cotton gins, around the cotton mill, and that's where the well of Riverside was established years ago, our church. And a place to come, a place to seek, a place to look, Brother Mark, and a place to seek God. And I can only imagine those little communities as you hear the stories of them crossing the fence, coming across the pastures, going to church. Finally established them a building. Finally established them a place. They outgrew it and moved to where we're at today. But the well of our church, the well of Riverside, our church, a place of gathering, we don't need to let it fill up. We don't need to let the Philistines come by and fill it up. We don't need to let time and different things to come by and fill us up. And y'all wonder what I'm doing. I got part of my notes on this phone, and it's a little hard to get into sometimes. But I want to talk to us a little bit about if you have an established well and you're looking this morning and I told y'all Brother Mark was better at this than I was. What are some common things that works on our well that keeps us from having access to a steady flow of water? I got a few things we're going to talk about this morning. One of them is unbelief. One of them is bitterness. One of them is rebellion. One of them is carnality, and one of them is pride. When you get in here and you talk about unbelief, it's so said in Romans 10:7 said, so then faith cometh by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. What happens when you don't believe? When you get down and the devil comes by and says, well, you know, that ain't exactly the way you got to live it. That ain't exactly the way you have to do it. You can come by and you can go this way, or you can use this version of the word, or you can use that version of the word, or, you know, you really haven't got to live as strict as the elders did, and you really don't have to live it like this one did. But, you know, if you'll get out the spade of the word, if you'll get out the shovel of the word, and you'll go to digging about your heart, and you'll go to digging about your life, and you'll go to digging about looking and searching the scriptures, he'll show you what you need to do. And if you'll get past that part of unbelief and really go into believing in God's word, it'll be with you. I thought I was with a person yesterday, and you know, he went through a school that was very close and dear to our heart. We fellowship at times, and you know, he said after he graduated, he went to seminary school, and he said, you know, after I had graduated high school, he said, I didn't really believe in God. And so he said, I went on to really search the scriptures and read the Hebrew and read the Greek and really search to really see if it was really real. And you know, sometimes if you might have been raised in church, and you might have been even raised in Riverside, and you may still in your heart say, well, I just don't believe it like that. I just don't believe it like they preach it. But if you'll get in that word, Brother Mark, and go to digging in that word, and go to looking, and go to digging out, you can get on down to the bottom of your well. Another thing that happens in our wells, and what I'm talking about is an established well that you've already experienced the well of salvation, but it just ain't flowing like it used to. You ain't dipping like it used to. You know, you ever go out there and you may not have done it, but you know, if those wells ain't covered up and they can get trash and dirt and everything else, people can throw trash in them, shoot holes in your bucket, all kind of things. But you got to work on keeping it clean and keeping it in a place that you can live by. Another thing that's very common is bitterness. And in Matthew 5:41, it says, and whosoever shall compel thee to go a mile, go with him twain. You say, well, what has that got to do with bitterness? How to overcome bitterness is with the spade of kind and a peaceable attitude. It's easy, Brother Terry, if something happens between me and you, and I didn't like the way you did me, or you didn't like the way I treated you, the devil will come by and he'll take just a little word, just a little event, just a little thing to happen, and he'll plant a seed of bitterness in your heart, and it'll grow. If you fertilize it and you water it, it'll grow. And you don't have to worry about doing too much of it. The devil will come by and water and fertilize it for you. Every time you see that person, you'll say, well, I remember this and this and this about him. And somebody else will come up to you and say, well, what about so-and-so? And you say, well, I remember this and this and this about them. I remember what they did this day, that day, and that day. And you ponder all that stuff in your heart, and it becomes a bitterness to you. And not only does bitterness affect you and your well, if you come to church and you bitter to somebody in your church, it affects the whole church. Because it's not long that you see that people start recognizing that me and you can't get along. And then they start wondering, well, what's wrong with, and I'm just using Brother Terry as an example because he's sitting on the front row. There's nothing between me and Brother Terry. Y'all, I'm just using this as an example this morning. But it won't take long that people start saying, well, I wonder what's wrong with him. Why won't they speak? Why won't this happen? Why does he go this way and he goes that way? And all of a sudden it starts sowing discord among the brethren. And it starts hindering the function of the church. It starts hindering the well of the church. But not only but it started with your well at home. It started with the little root of bitterness in you. So how do we overcome that? We overcome it with kindness. We overcome it with meekness. We overcome it with peace. It says, because follow peace with all men and wholeness without shall no man, which no man shall see the Lord. Looking diligently lest any man fail of the grace of God, let any root of bitterness springing up trouble you, and therefore many be defiled. I have seen just little bits of bitterness spring up. All of a sudden it just starts with one thing, and it grows, and it grows, and it grows. You know, bitterness to me, when I look at it and when I compare it to the kudzu vine. We all know what the kudzu vine is. It'll grow a foot a day. It was introduced by the government years ago as erosion control. Honestly, folks, I didn't know it till I was in high school, and we was going over to Montgomery, Alabama one day, and we rode by, and I asked Daddy, I said, what is all these vines hanging on the light lines and covering up everything? Because I'd never seen kudzu at our house. It just wasn't something that grew around Barron County. There was very few places in it. But when these counties that had kudzu, it was prevalent. It was everywhere. And if you don't start it off small and get rid of it, it is hard to control. Because it gets on the light lines, it gets on the power poles, it gets on the trees, it smothers everything around it. That's what bitterness will do to you. If you don't take care of it when it's young and you don't take care of it when it's small, it's going to grow and it's going to take over your life. It'll take over everything in it. It'll go every place about it. And it'll just smother you out until you just can't survive any longer. You know, the only way to really, and you really can't, you can control kudzu. The best way to do is get a bunch of cows in there and let them eat it all up, dig it up by the roots and haul it out. That's the way to control bitterness. You have to be peaceful. You have to be long-suffering. You have to show kindness. You have to have a great attitude. You really have to work at it, and you really have to work hard at it to clean it up. You have to read God's word, and you have to really work in your heart to say, I'm gonna dig that out. I'm going to settle the score. I'm going to say, it's not me, Lord. And every time I see that person or whatever it is, I'm going to be peace about it. I'm going to have the right attitude. I'm going to go forward. The next one is rebellion. Now, you think of rebellion, you know, I think of raising kids. I think, well, you tell him something, he didn't do it. That's rebellion. Well, it is. But it can go more than that. You ever sat in the church service and the preacher start preaching, and he comes down and he hits on one point, and the devil pop in your mind and say, I wonder who he's preaching to now. That's not me. And you look around the church service and you say, well, he's preaching to this one over here, he's preaching to that one over there. That part of the sermon is for him. And the devil will make you just say, well, tune it out. Then you get on down and you'll deal with this over here, and you'll say, no, that's not me, that's for him. That's for her. And you say, well, Randy, that really ain't what it is. Yeah, but you're rebelling against God's word as it comes to you. You're trying to push it off to somebody else. You're saying, Lord, you're not looking at it and saying, Lord, is there a portion of what he's saying? It may not be the exact words, but is there the thought, the principle, and the way he's presenting it? Is there some part of that that really needs to apply to my life? Is there some part of that I can do? And Brother Mark, it's the spirit of rebellion. It's the spirit of, he's not preaching to me, he's preaching to him. And how does it affect you? When it affects you when the altar call is given, and you get down there and you say, he wasn't preaching to me, he was preaching to him, I ain't going. I'll wait till they give the general church. And you use that little barrier to keep you from getting water that day. Y'all, this aggravating phone. I have to start printing them out. But how to dig out rebellion is the spade of submission. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is the iniquity of idolatry. Because thou hast rejected the word of the Lord, he hath also rejected thee from being king. This is in 1 Samuel. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. If you will submit to God, and if you will dwell in the secret places of the Most High, then you'll be in the shadow of the Almighty. You can tell a person when he comes to church if he's been in the secret places at home. You can tell a person when he comes to church if he's been drinking of the well at home, if he's been finding his secret place, and if he's been really looking and digging and drinking water at home. Now, another one down here is carnality. You say, well, I'm not carnal, I'm saved. It says, and take heed to yourselves, lest any time your hearts be overcharged with surfeiting and drunkenness, and the cares of life, and so that the day come upon you unaware. For as a snare shall it come on all them that dwell on the face of the earth. Watch you therefore, and pray always, that you may account worthy to escape all these things that shall come to pass, and to stand before the Son of Man. The way to dig out carnality is a spade of prayer. In 2021, compared to 1975, for those that was living in 1975 or whenever you was 10 or 15 years old, even when you was in high school, some of y'all probably wasn't even born to 1980 or so. Is the cares of life today any greater than that? Is your cares of life that you're dealing with today any greater than it was 5 years ago? Are the things in life that you're trying to do, and you say, well, I just got to do it. I got to do this. I got to do that. I got to go here. I got to go there. And what happens? What does it rob you of? The first thing it robs you of is your time in prayer. Your time in meditation. When your mind is so cluttered with everything that's going on, when your mind is so cluttered with all the things, and I'm not talking about evil thoughts, folks. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about trying to do evil, looking at evil, being part of evil. I'm just talking about the general cares of life. Sometimes the cares of life could even be church work. Because I have found out over the years that if you'll volunteer, you can load your wagon. You can get so loaded down till you don't have any time for yourself and time of prayer. But folks, if we get to the point that our cares of life is so great until we really can't concentrate on God, and we really can't spend our time in prayer, and we really can't seek out the face of God, we'll start drying up spiritually. We may still come to church on a regular basis. We may still come and be a part of the church. You may still profess and be a Christian, but you get in and you sit down. You ever come to church and you finally just sit down, and when you sit down you get sleepy and tired because you done so much until when you get there, that's the first place that you just kind of sit down. On Wednesday nights you worked hard all week and you come in and you just sit down. And you say, well, if Brother Denville can sing it up, I'll get in. And you sit there. Brother Mark can pull it up the hill, then I'll get in. And you sit there. Because we're tired. What is that? That is a form of the devil trying to get us down. He knows that he can't convince us not to be a Christian. He knows he can't convince us not to serve God. He knows he can't convince us that we're not going to pray. And he knows he can't tell us that you've never been saved. So what does he do? He just gets us so busy until we don't have time to do what we need to do. It happens, folks. That's probably one of the biggest problems, one of the biggest things that happens to a Christian's life is he just gets too busy and he neglects time with God. Now, I'm not saying, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that all your communication with God is on your knees. Because I have been many a time riding up down the road in a truck and going from one place to another place, turn the radio off, turn the cell phone off, and me and God just meditate. He don't always just talk to you when you're on the knees, but he wants you to get into a long time with him that you can communicate, that you can concentrate. Your wife or husband ever, you ever been trying to talk to them and they just didn't act like they was paying attention to you? Like you ever talk to somebody and you're trying to tell them something, they just look like they're just, nowadays what it is you'll talk to them, they're sitting over and playing on their phone. They were trying to text somebody. They were trying to do this, trying to do that. You riding down the road trying to carry on a conversation with somebody, they over on the phone. And you're like, okay, this is our time together. Why are you spending it with other things? What you think about God? What you think about him when he wants you to spend some time with him and we're over busy doing something else? Your mind's so cluttered, carnality. Those things affect our water. It affects our well. It affects our spirituality. It affects our growth. And I'm not here I'm just telling you ideas of what can affect the well of life. The next one is one that we deal with on a regular basis. It's called pride. Has pride ever gotten in your way? Has Brother Mark, you ain't got to raise your hand, because I'll go ahead and raise mine for you. Has Brother Mark ever preached something to you? Preached right where you was at? I ain't talking about you sinning. I'm just talking about where you needed to be improving. Preached right where you needed to be. Give an altar call and said, would you come pray? Does anybody need any help? Anybody want special prayer? Anybody want to come on down? And you stand there at the pew and say, well, I'll wait till he calls everybody. If I wait 5 more seconds, 30 more seconds, I can go with the rest of them. You ever done that? I have. I've also been on the other side of that when he preached to me, and I stepped out and I said, Lord, it don't matter what people think about me. It don't matter whether they think that I'm the worst part of his sermon today or I'm just one little portion of it. But he got to me, and I need help. And you know what happens? When you step out, even though it's 30 seconds difference, when you step out, when he first calls, instead of coming with the crowd, to me, in my experience, and in me searching on the altar, I have found that when I step out individually and admit that it was for me and that I need help, and I make the first effort, and I don't try to go with the crowd, and when I walk down to the altar and I kneel and pray, then I can get help quicker than if I just come with the crowd. That's me, church. I'm just confessing this morning. Sometimes pride will come by, and it'll try to keep that water clouded, keep that water dirty, keep you from getting your blessing. But the spade of humility, and humble, and say, yes, Lord, it's me, Lord. Probably this one, we've come back to church, and we're back in services. But the devil is still using the pandemic to rob us of our time around the altar. He's still using the pandemic. Even before the pandemic came along, our time around the altar wasn't what it had been in years past. It would start, okay, let's face it. Sometimes when you run into sound system or you run into the video system and it's going to take you 20 or 30 minutes to process some stuff, when he gives the altar call and you start the altar, you may start that so that it starts the clock. Sometimes before that person can start it in the 30 seconds or a minute that it takes, it comes to the altar, half our altar service is already over. You say, well, why is that? Well, that's just, we ain't spending that time we need to around the altar after our message, after our services. I can tell you, when you have a good altar call, you have a good altar service, and people really get in and get blessed, and people really get to moving, after the first one, you can tell a difference. After the second service in a row, you can really tell a difference. By the third service, if you've had a really good altar call and you had a really good altar service and it's lasted several minutes, even 20 minutes or whatever, by the fourth one, they really expected another one. Because it's something that kindles. It's that fresh water. It's that water that's coming in. It's that spiritual water that's reviving us, that's carrying us forth, that's giving it to us. So what I want to tell you this morning, church, is let's make sure our well is clean. Now, these things I told you here this morning ain't necessarily sinful, but it's things that the devil uses to keep us from growing and getting more of God and drinking of the well of life. As you'll read on and through, and I know we're getting closer to time this morning, but in pride, I got a few scriptures here on pride. And says, and take heed to yourselves, lest any time your hearts be overcharged. Oh, I didn't read that one. Sorry. On humility and pride. Pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Likewise, you younger, submit yourselves unto the elder. Yea, all of you be subject one to another, and clothed with humility. For God resisteth the proud, and giveth grace to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time. Casting all your care upon him, for he careth for you. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour. Whom resist steadfast in the faith, knowing that the same afflictions are accomplished in your brethren that are in the world. But the God of our grace, who hath called us unto his eternal glory by Christ Jesus, after that which we have suffered a while, make you perfect, establish, strengthen, and settle you. What's he saying? He said, submit, humble yourselves, pray, seek my face. Don't be prideful. If you'll do that, what will he do? He says, but the God of all grace, who hath called unto his eternal glory by Jesus Christ, after that you have suffered a while, will make you perfect, establish, strengthen, and settle you. What does that mean? That means that if you'll humble before him, if you'll serve him, and if you'll be humble and humility, that he'll strengthen you and he'll carry you further. He'll take you to the end of the life. He'll take you to glory. He'll take you to heaven. All this world will be gone. Church, I'm not talking to you this morning and saying that we still have a wonderful church. The Spirit of the Lord moves. The Spirit of the Lord comes by. But what I want you this morning, and what I want us, is that you don't come down and depend on somebody else to have the water. You don't come down and say, well, if they don't pray it down or sing it down or preach it down today, then I'm just not going to drink any. But you do your homework at home. You make sure your well is cleaned out. You make sure in your closet that you spend a little time with God, that you know that your well is clean, so that when you come to water, when you come to church, that you can just expand on others. Now, there's one little thing, if I can find it over here, that I didn't write it down, that I want to quote. I know it says, our experience in the Lord should be such as to have enough to give drink to others. Our experience shouldn't be one that we just have just enough for us, Brother Mark, but we have enough to share with somebody else. I was with two gentlemen this week, actually Thursday, and I never met the guy before, and the other guy that was with me had met him. And he says, you know, they was two 80-plus-year-olds, and the guy that was standing there, he's told the guy that was with me, he says, you know, the first time I met you, I knew you was a Christian. He said, I knew you was a man of God. He said, because the way you acted, the way you talked, and the way your character, and the way just the demeanor around you, I could tell in my first conversation with you that you was a man of God. Why was that? Because he had enough water. He had enough spirit about him that he could share with others. He had enough that he didn't have to walk out and say, I'm a Christian. I love the Lord. That he walked his life. He did his life. And his light shined. And his actions shined. And the Lord blessed him because he spent his time drinking from the well. He spent his time keeping the well clean. He spent his time being humble, being submissive, time in prayer, time in the Word. And this morning I'd like to tell you that the wells that have been established, the wells that our fathers dug, the wells that our grandmothers dug and our great-grandfathers dug, those wells are still viable wells. We may have to come by and dig around and do it the way they did it. But if we'll do it the way the old-timers did it and the way this book tells us to do it, we can have the same wells that they have. We can have the same spirit moving in here. We can still have 6-week revivals. We can still have however long. You can still see 20 or 30 people getting saved. You can still see people getting baptized. I thought this week, one of my friends was going to be, somebody asked him to baptize him. And he told me, he said, well, I'll get out the water and we'll fill up the baptismal pool and we'll baptize you. That person said, no, I want to be baptized in the river. So he calls out to Bingham out here and says, can we baptize in the lake out there, in the river? I said, yeah, you can get over on the side of the beach. He said, now how many of you got baptized? He said, well, there's one or two. He said, well, I was just wondering. There was a church come out there the other day to baptize and said, I thought they was parting the Red Sea. There was so many of them. Church, we can still win souls. God is still in the saving business. He still has grace to save, grace to keep us, and grace to carry us on. Let's just keep searching Him, keep serving Him, and keep keeping our wells clean. Thank you for your time this morning.